to hit record. It's being recorded now. And if I could just encourage everybody to please keep your speaker off. We will have a Q&A at the end of today's session, but please feel free to type your questions in as they come up, and I'll make sure that we try to get to as many of them as possible in the last 10 minutes. And then we will be recording this and putting it on our website. And so if for some reason you missed some of it, or you want to go back and watch it again, or you want to share it with somebody because you found it to be helpful, it will be available by the latest middle of this week for you to access. And so now, without further ado, I am going to launch into reading the very accomplished bios of our participants today. First, I'll start with Lauren Smith Brody. She's the founder of the Fifth Trimester movement and consulting, which supports the transition back to work after baby to keep women in the workplace and foster gender equality. Her book, The Fifth Trimester, The Working Mom's Guide to Style, Sanity, and Success After Baby, was a simultaneous bestseller in the Amazon categories of motherhood, women and business, and cultural anthropology. The Fifth Trimester has been featured in the New York Times, on Good Morning America, CNN.com, and dozens more outlets. The Brodys has been a featured speaker at companies and organizations including Facebook, Free Frank, the New York Times, Google, American Express, The Wing, GLG, Rackspace, Liberty Mutual, PwC, Fisher Phillips, the Wharton Women's Summit, and more. We are also joined by Dr. Catherine Birndorf, MD. She's the co-founder and medical director of the Motherhood Center of New York. Dr. Birndorf is founding director of the Payne Whitney Women's Program at the New York Presbyterian Hospital Weill Cornell Medical Center, where she's an associate professor of psychiatry and obstetrics and gynecology. Dr. Birndorf is a board member of Postpartum Support International, a nonprofit organization for awareness, prevention, and treatment of mental health issues related to childbearing worldwide. For 10 years, Dr. Birndorf was a regular mental health columnist for Self Magazine and has appeared on numerous television programs, including The Today Show, Good Morning America, MSNBC, and CNN. Her first book, The 9 Rooms of Happiness, co-authored with Lucy Danziger, was published in 2010. She is also the author with Alexander Sachs of What No One Tells You. And one of the slides that we'll be showing at the end will be a graphic of both Lauren and Dr. Birndorf's books, which I highly recommend. So you can see what they look like and order them on Amazon if you want to today. So I'm going to start off with a general question for both of you. And then just so folks know the way that we're going to run this today, I have some questions for both Lauren and also Dr. Birndorf. But this first question is really going to be general. And so maybe both of you can begin with providing a brief landscape of what you're seeing and hearing from new moms returning to work in a pandemic. And just so you know, Lauren is going to be speaking much from her experience, of providing insight and ideas and ways to navigate returning to work in kind of a professional context. And Dr. Birndorf will be able to offer some insights on how to manage this return to work and the emotional aspects of it. So if both of you want to take a stab at letting us know what you're seeing and hearing from new moms returning to work right now.
Sure. Thank you, Paige. That's such a nice introduction. And it's such a relief and so nice to be doing this with Dr. Birndorf, because typically I'll get asked a lot of questions that have a lot to do with mental health. And I'm always really clear about the fact that I'm not a therapist. I'm a coach in many ways to a lot of women and a consultant and a speaker, but it's wonderful to be able to do this with a psychiatrist who is so deeply knowledgeable in this area. So thank you guys for having me. I always think it's fun just when we're on Zoom together. I can't see everybody who's on, but I assume that there are some people who are holding babies. If I had babies, I would be holding my baby right now. But I think it's fun to actually sort of explain, like, how is this happening? How do I have my hair is like mostly dry and I have lipstick on and the door's closed? And it's because I've been for this month staying with my mother-in-law, and she has largely handled our childcare. We're in Erie, Pennsylvania, where my husband's mom lives. And my husband has been working, he's a doctor in New York and has been working this whole time, but just came back a couple days ago. So he's with us now. So he is feeding my son behind this door leftover pizza right now. And so that's how I'm able to be here. So please don't have any illusion that like, this is easy, that this is what everybody should be able to, speak eloquently into a camera with your lipstick on right now. That's not what we expect of really any working moms right now. So please know that. And just to answer your question, Paige, so what I see is a lot of people generally, so generally I work with women as they are either about to leave on maternity leave, or they are on their maternity leave and anticipating, coming back, or they have been back a little bit and are potentially struggling or just want to know kind of what's normal and how to feel, more successful in this transition. And I started doing the research for my book, gosh, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago now, with this notion that there really is a fifth trimester. If the fourth is that, sort of hazy newborn phase of the newborn who's, not quite ready to be born yet. That's that Dr. Harvey Karp, happiest baby idea, that babies are sort of meant to be in the womb for an extra 3 months. That like, guess what happens at the end of those 3 months is like, largely in America, if you have access to FMLA, you might be able to take a full 12 weeks and then, you're back at work. So that was sort of the notion I had if I knew what the fourth trimester was. And then I realized going back to work that actually there is this whole additional fifth trimester of this transition that in our society is not very well set up to support parents, and that we have largely internalized to think there must be something wrong with me if this is hard. But you should know contextually in the rest of the world, every other developed country in the world has paid maternity leave for moms. And in very few is it as little as 12 weeks. All of the research really shows us that 6 months is most protective of mom's mental health, mom's physical health, dad or partner's bond with the baby, mom's ability to maintain and sustain her income and career and all of these things. And so if it's hard, it's only natural that it's hard. But what I found when I went through it twice, and I was a magazine editor at the time and working crazy hours, was that there was a lot in sort of those moments of feeling at sea that actually I gained a lot of strength as a manager and understood, a lot about sharing vulnerability that ultimately was able to benefit my larger organization. And so that's a lot of what I try to teach. So the women I work with are usually feeling pretty messy. This is a really messy and hard transition, and also hopeful. And what I'm finding for the women I'm working with right now, and the women I've been working with really since March, when, we sort of had a start date in America to this pandemic, is that they're not necessarily aware of the world outside of their little kind of home and maternal bubble. And they think like, oh, I'm going through this. But one of the sort of like, there's the term silver lining comes up way too often in these webinars, because like nothing's really like shiny, sparkling silver right now. But if there is one thing, it's that actually your colleagues are largely going through a lot of the same things that new moms have gone through returning to work forever. That feeling of not being seen, of not knowing, what you're stepping into, of wanting to, of having really limited time, of having to be really deliberate about how you spend your time, of wanting to feel valued, of transitioning in, transitioning out, flexibility needs, all kinds of things. So it's funny because I'm actually seeing a lot of what I've always seen, but just with this layer of, when is the end of this? Like how long are we making these plans for? Because I think all any mom really wants is a plan.
I just want to like stand up and like, that's great. That's such wise words, Lauren. So thank you. And I also want to say it's quiet here because I am sequestered off in a room with 2 older kids who I've told do not interrupt me between 12 and 1 because I'd really like to have some privacy. So it's like, it's to your opening, it's really hard for everyone, regardless of the age of your kids, and regardless of how long you've been doing whatever you've been doing. I'm probably older than most people on this call, and I'm still struggling with, teenagers and college age kids who, I'm trying to figure out how to manage and do my full-time plus job. So I just want to say, regardless of what it looks like, and that I actually also blow dried my hair today. Hadn't done that in a while. It's, this is not the norm. So I join you there. And I also think it's been very funny what you said at the end about how everyone in the world now it's almost like they're on maternity leave with women going through it. I feel like it's a throwback to when I was, again, sort of sequestered at home and felt so isolated and lonely and didn't know what to do and was anxious. And now the whole world's in it with us together. We're all in it together in this particular way, which nobody would have wished on any of us. But it's a funny moment. And so I'm very excited to learn from you, Lauren, sort of what's happening out there in these, not in the non-emotional way, but just what's really some of these statistics and what's happening in the world, because we do it very poorly, unfortunately, in the US. We are so far behind other developed countries in supporting mothers. And we don't have any kind of coordinated, really robust family care, right? This is not just a woman's issue. This is a family issue. And we're never going to solve for it if we keep thinking it's all about the mom. But here we are. And, I helped start a center called the Motherhood Center. So I'm not denying that so much falls on the mom, and that there's a particular, whether it's genetics or it's, is this really Darwinian in nature? Where's the developmental piece? There's so much to it, but so much falls on the mom. And how to maintain an identity as anything other than a mom is really hard once you're a mom. So I'll leave it at that and let Paige go forward with questions. But I just want to say from the beginning, this is so hard, and it's hard for all of us. And I have such empathy for everyone and try to have self-compassion for myself in thinking about how we're all getting through this and trying to just make it.
Thank you both. I oftentimes, and perhaps this isn't funny, but I liken it to when I speak to moms frequently about A, the transition to motherhood in a pandemic, and B, the transition to motherhood in a pandemic and going back to work. I will say it reminds me of the olden days when our grandparents used to say, "You think you had it hard? I used to have to walk 20 miles to school every day in a snowstorm." I feel like women that are going through this right now, like, they get every possible badge and gold star that ever existed, because this is uncharted territory and we don't have a roadmap or a rule book for this. We're making it up as we go along. So this cohort of new moms are so incredibly strong and are really paving the way for history. So I'm going to switch gears now, and I'm going to ask you both some individual questions. I'm going to start with you, Lauren. And we hear this a lot, this concern of women feeling scared to leave their baby or be physically back at work because of the virus. How can a new mom who is fearful of this negotiate to keep working from home, even if perhaps the request is for her to return to the office?
So I think I think that there's a tendency when you have been home on maternity leave to think this is my special circumstance, that like I'm going through this and I'm going to be a real pain in the ass. I asked for this thing. But I think to think beyond your own experience and realize that probably you have a number of colleagues who have the same fear, perhaps for different reasons. There could be people with older children whose schools may not reopen. There could be older children who have special needs, developmental needs themselves. There could be people who are trying to tend to their own mental health but may not be moms. There certainly are dads and partners. There could be somebody with an elder care need. There could be someone whose partner is immunocompromised. It sounds like a pile-on of all kinds of just, like bad circumstances. But the point is really that, many, many, many of us are caregivers in one way or another. So first of all, internalize the idea that if you're going to ask for something, you're probably not just asking for it for yourself. And that can feel like a pretty big, obligation, but it's also, I really like to think of it as an opportunity, and also to sort of destigmatize the idea that like you the mom with the new baby needs this thing, like probably most of the people you work with need this flexibility. And we have seen, you know, I cannot tell you how many organizations that I work with or that I've been, you know, trying to pitch my services to for years who have said to me, you know, sorry, we don't do flexible work, or, you know, we have a policy, it's 1 day a week, that's it. Well, guess what? Like most of us, you know, anybody who is not in an essential job right now, their employer has probably seen that actually when push comes to shove, if you have to work from home, if you have to do that meeting on Zoom, guess what? Like it can happen because we've made it happen for these past several months. At first it was emergency mode, but I think we've moved now into sustainable mode and maybe up and down mode. You know, there may be, you know, cities and regions that reopen and then close back down. And we're going to have to find a rhythm to being ambidextrous and kind of, you know, using both of our hands and working from home, working remotely, working in the office. Anyway, any kind of negotiation really starts with internally negotiating with yourself and knowing that this is for not just for you, but actually for a greater good. And that greater good may be your family. That greater good may be your organization. That greater good may even be like all women in America, which I realize sounds ridiculously daunting, but it's really important to understand that if this feels hard, it's not because of something you've done wrong. It's because of a culture that is still actually fairly new. Our country is fairly new compared to many other developed countries in the world, and we're still figuring this stuff out. So start inside. And then do some really concrete research, and whether or not you actually share that with the person, you know, on the other side of the screen or across the table, whoever you're negotiating with, that may depend on the circumstances, but it's important to know what actually, like in written policy, is offered in your workplace, what precedent that maybe is not written down, but has been used by someone else and which could actually legally obligate your employer to offer you the same, what precedent has been set by somebody else. And also look beyond, you know, your immediate employer to your competitors in the industry, and what do they offer? If you're asking, you know, for flexibility of location or hours, what do they have that they offer their employees? And does your employer lag behind? In which case you can make a case for like you got to keep up in order to be competitive. Or are they sort of ahead of the game? In which case you can say, you know, hey, like let's continue to be a leader in this way. Like, look, it could probably even get us, you know, accolades in press, and it's clearly helping, you know, our bottom line. Do that research. You may not necessarily need to actually share those numbers, but know them inside yourself because you're going to feel that much more confident. Then go into the conversation with, you know, what you're asking for, but do not think of it as an accommodation. This isn't an ask. This is more like you are presenting a plan for how you can be successful in your job now. And when you think of it that way, it feels much more mutual. And so you can think of, you know, how is this beneficial to my employer and how is it beneficial to me? You know, how is it going to let me do all of the, you know, I'm sorry to be so like, you know, kind of like silly office, you know, the office words about it, but like, you know, like my deliverables, like what are they in my job? How am I going to deliver them? And how might I even actually deliver them better if I have access to this flexibility? So make that case, anticipate their concerns, know that the person you're negotiating with probably also has a boss who they're going to have to take the plan to. So give them what they need to be able to do that. And then I think this is most key for new moms. So ask to try it temporarily. This is not a do or die, yes or no, this is how my job is going to be now. This is, let's try this plan for a month and see how it goes. And obviously the world is so in flux right now that like your needs may change in the next month, but also I've said this in pre-pandemic times as well, because baby's needs change. I was just on a coaching call with a mom this morning whose baby is just starting solids, and it actually is going to impact the schedule of how she's fit work into her day because she's going to be nursing at different times now. And so know that your needs may change. So this is not a do or die conversation. This is actually an ongoing sort of career development conversation that we all should be having anyway, that is beneficial to your employer and to you. Do all that and you're going to succeed. And if you don't, it probably means you're working for people who you might not want to work for, and that's okay too.
Thank you, Lauren. So well said.
Can I just jump on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I'm taking notes, Lauren. I think it's so smart and so practical and so real. And I feel like one thing that you said that I think helps to alleviate some of the guilt that we as moms can feel working, not just with our kids, but with our employers, is that we think it's us, or we think it's the motherhood penalty. It's a systemic issue, right? It is really a system that is not hospitable to any variation of any kind. So there's, we're all doing what we can to kind of to accommodate a very dysfunctional system. So I just want to say that because I love how you said, consult yourself first, and also recognize that you're dealing within a system that's not really interested potentially in how we feel or what we need. And I'm hearing a little baby in the background, and I'm just wondering, I could just listen to that, but I'm just wondering if you could just hit mute, whoever that is. So
I think also it can feel, it's important to recognize that very often these cultural changes that happen, either in our tiny workplaces or in our larger industries or in our country as a whole, the burden of that so often is placed on the people who are already underrepresented. Yeah. So if you can't say yes to being on the Zoom call for, the Black employees of your law firm, and the moms of toddlers in your law firm, and the associates in your law, and I'm sorry to use a law firm as the example when that's clearly not everybody's career who's on this call, but you may need to say no to some of that work too, and that's okay, because if you can protect yourself and stay in your career, you'll be more likely to reach a leadership level where you might have more flexibility to make those changes officially too.
Excellent.
Catherine, so often we hear about that transition to motherhood and how difficult it is, because no one can prepare you for what it's like to be a mom. No matter how many conversations you have or how many books you read, it hits you like, out of nowhere. And that's when you know what it's like to be a mom. And so one of the things that we hear frequently at the Motherhood Center is that moms feel like they have kind of lost touch with their identity, and they're trying to negotiate this new identity as a mother. And I think one of the things that's really complicated about this pandemic, especially for women who are working from home, is that there's not like a traditional transfer or movement from being a stay-at-home mom, not even like a new mom who is going through maternity leave and returning to work. There's all these rituals and things that go along with returning to work, right? And so in a non-pandemic world, you're a mom, you're at home, and then you get ready to go back to work and kind of have those separations of self, right? Like you're a mom at home, you're a wife at home, you do some stuff around the house at home, but then you go to work and you get to be your professional self. And granted, you're probably thinking a lot about the baby all day, but like there's no distractions. You are there and you are integrating your senses of selves in the context of distancing them. How do women make room for their separate identities of being a working professional and a new mom under one roof?
Well, first I'm going to answer not under one roof, because it is probably the biggest, most profound change of becoming a mother, right? That your identity shift is, the identity shift is this, it's this forever transition that, you can't give the baby back. It's like once a mother, always a mother, once postpartum, always postpartum. And you can't undo it. There's almost nothing else that's that irreversible. Maybe nothing else. So it's really so profound that, forget the pandemic, it's so hard. Because I always describe it sort of like a highway in your head. There's this idea, I've always felt like when you're just yourself, you're an individual person. You have your original family to think about and worries in life, but you still just got, like, say, a one-lane road. Then you pick up a partner maybe, And that's sort of, you're thinking about them, but they're adult. You hope they're an adult and they take care of themselves mostly. So you think about them too. You bring in a kid and now you're on like a 3-lane freeway or highway from whatever region you're from. And it's like, it's getting more complicated. You bring in a second kid, you're on like, you know, whatever, the 405 in LA. Like it's a lot, and you're never alone again. There's this problem, I think, that I find, I call it a problem, that mothers have. I love it because I always know where my kids are. They're always on my mind, and I'm here and I'm not thinking about them. I did hear my daughter just pull in, but like I can do a lot of things at the same time, for better and for worse. Multitasking, we're really good at that. But I think that it starts with this transition. Like when you become a mother, it's almost like, you know, you've heard the term matrescence, becoming a mother, like adolescence, becoming an adolescent, moving through these developmental stages. And it is really something to acknowledge and contend with. It didn't happen overnight. In that moment, you went from being pregnant to having a kid in your hands. It is a process, takes a long time. And that identity transition, I'm still grappling with it, right? It's like, it's forever. And so it's not just it's harder in the pandemic because of physical space and because of the limitations and the constraints that we have in our, if we're being COVID safe, which I really hope everyone's healthy and well. And to do that takes a lot of effort. So I've had sessions with people who in the bathroom. I have one person, you know, the baby was sleeping in a shower stall and the mother was sitting on the toilet with the lid down. So it was like, I'm like, this is, you know, you do what you have to do. And then I had somebody in the bathtub. She put pillows all around the bathtub, set up something, and was literally had her computer on things and functioning out of the bathtub. She said, this actually makes my back feel better. My neck's been hurting. So all kinds of creative things are happening to find space. So physically speaking, to your question, Paige, like how do you actually separate it? I didn't know how much I was going to miss my commute. Yeah. I mean, on my commute, I could listen to a podcast. I could call a friend back. I could finish up things for the day. I could grab something to eat. I could be by myself. I could walk home, whatever it is. Now it's on the other side of the wall. So it is complicated. I feel fortunate to have a wall that I get to be separate in, that I can have like I've claimed this office space right here that other people are vying for, but we negotiated. And how you do that, I think there has to be, to your point you asked about, like ritual, and how do you, there has to be almost a sacred space, even if it's literally, you said this the other day, Paige, you set up, you know, 2 cardboard boxes and put a plank on top of it and call it a desk in the corner of a living room or in your kitchen, wherever the heck it is, it doesn't matter. But what is yours? Where can you get into that headset and most clearly and as best as you can get into the flow of being your professional self, even though the highway is always active. It's always active. I'm sorry as a mother, if someone can tell me that they've figured out a way to quiet that highway, I'd love to know. But it's there, it's in the background. And I gotta say, I don't want to start a controversy, but I don't see it as frequently for men. I think, or maybe we should say for the primary caretaker, I think that highway is a pretty active place. I don't know, Lauren.
I forgot to say how old my kids are. So my kids are also, they're older. They're 9 and 12, and they're in, if there is a sweet spot for being a kid going through a pandemic, I think that's it, because they're not teenagers who are like dying to go be themselves out in the world. And they're not toddlers who are yanking on my pant leg with like sticky hands. You know, they're at an age where actually they should learn some independence. And so for me to close the door and tell them, do not come in, there's every chance that my 9-year-old will come in. I usually start these calls by saying like, he may come in. I have a puppy, my puppy may pee, who knows? But it's in some ways, I think it's going to be a good comfort to, everybody we work with, that our lives are really precious. And I think that's never been more visible than it is right now on Zoom with colleagues, where like every square is the same size. And you can see that jerk who's talking too much because they have that, that guy like has that, sorry to be like sexist about it, but probably a guy, has that ring around his, you know, his square. It's kind of egalitarian in a good way. I'm so glad you mentioned the commute, because this is actually a super practical tip. I don't have that many like just nuts and bolts practical tips. This is one that I have seen work for a lot of the women I'm working with, which is if you miss your commute, if you miss that transition time between my home self and my work self, which I think a lot of us are feeling right now, create whatever you can of a faux commute. It may be a masked walk around your block. It may be, you know, that you go into the other room and I have one client I'm working with who just really misses like the brain teasers that she used to do. So now before she starts working, even though it steals a little time from work and a little time from baby, she goes and she does 10 minutes of puzzles before she starts working, because it makes her brain feel more turned on, which I thought was so cool. And I relate to that too. So whatever you can do to create that faux commute, maybe you're actually folding laundry while you do it, but if you're listening to, you know, your favorite podcast for 15 minutes, that can count too. I think it's really about reframing things and understanding that like it all counts. You know, put all your to-dos on the same list. Don't have a work list and a life list. You should feel like if you got to more of one than the other today, that you still got to a pretty big number, and it all counts toward the same goal. I'm throwing a lot into this response, but I also want to say that, by the way, all moms work. Whether or not we get paid to do that work is a whole other discussion, but the work that you're doing to take care of your family has a financial value to the economy, and it certainly has an emotional value to your family, and you should feel like it counts, even if that's somewhat unbalanced right now. About sort of separating, I think it's also important to say that you may need that separation. You may need, if you are like privileged enough to be working from home with a baby and you have a caregiver in your home with you right now, you may find you're the kind of person who needs to still take that like 8 hours straight and close the door and leave the pumped milk and still pump. That may work for you. If you are not comfortable with that, that's okay too. I have one a very, very high achieving mom who I've been working with, who said to me, I feel terrible because I can hear my baby in the other room, and like, why am I pumping? Like, why don't I just nurse her? But then I know if I get that snuggle time, it's going to distract me for 10 minutes. And I was like, but do you like it? Does it make you, are you distracted right now by how upset you are to not be doing that? That's distracting too. So we actually figured out, and she's a very like type A person who kind of needs her schedule spelled out. We figured out how to have those moments break up her day and still set aside, you know, these like 2.5 hour chunks of flow, which is another really important word that I had never used in my work until March 12th. And now it is like key, that you need to be able to get into the mindset of production. And you might be the kind of person who can like take things in all day long, and that does count as working if you're like on Slack or you're receiving emails. Be predictable in your output during those two. If you can try to set up 2 flow times for yourself of like, these are the times when I am like at keyboard and responding, and let your colleagues kind of expect when those times are. It'll also free you up from that distraction of worrying that there's that thing you're not responding to. So I threw a ton of information into that answer, but I hope it all sort of speaks to the same lack of separation that we're feeling right now.
Absolutely. And Catherine, just to put a label to what you were saying previously, the mental load or emotional labor, I think, is a good term to describe the 4-lane highway, or 3 or 2 or however lanes it must be. It's this kind of constant hamster wheel, even if it's in the back of our mind, of all the things, you know, is everyone okay? What are the lists that I need to stay on top of? And it takes up a lot of energy. So Lauren, for women who are worried about the fact that they feel as though they might have been forgotten about while they were on maternity leave, especially on the backdrop of so much has changed since they were at their company or their organization last, what advice would you give to women on how they can re-enter the workplace and be visible?
So if you were returning to work physically and you walked in that door, you would probably go and say hello to certainly everybody who's on, you know, an immediate touch for you and on your immediate team, you know, the person you report into, anybody who might work for you, your sort of lateral report colleagues, you would go and make individual times, even if it's casual, just stopping by, you know, their desk to say, hey, I'm back, here I am. It can feel a little bit awkward, you know, when you have to actually set up a time to Zoom with somebody to have those incredibly meaningful collegial interactions. And so I would say just be really deliberate about it and make those, you know, make time for those conversations. Often women will return to work and they will find either there is just this pile up of things for them to jump into, or in some ways, the opposite can happen too, which is in some ways more unsettling, is that you come back and like, you don't even know what you're supposed to jump into. So having those conversations with people where perhaps you take back over something that someone was covering for you, or you decide like, actually, it makes more sense for this project to stay with this person so that I'm freed up to work on X other project, but you've also talked to your boss so you know what that other project could be. You need to still have those conversations in order to feel visible and be visible. And then the other thing that sort of falls by the wayside, understandably, for a lot of new moms who are coming back in normal times, whose day just has this like, you know, hard stop at the end of it that it never had before, because either you're coming home to a caregiver or a family member who's caring for your child, or you are picking up your kid at daycare and you're going to be charged, you know, by the minute for every minute you're late. You have this hard stop. And so one thing that we do a lot less of in those moments, and I think that a lot of people universally are feeling, not just new parents in this pandemic and working remotely, is the lack of business development. And this is not every kind of job. Not every kind of job has business development, but whatever your version of that is, whether that is actually like bringing in clients to your business, or that is networking, or, you know, making relationships or making introductions, you know, or the time you might spend on LinkedIn. Try to, whatever you can, and I hate to give anybody any more to do. So if it's too much, like, it's okay to put pause on it, but put a date on your calendar when you're going to assess if you should keep pausing. But do try to build in a little bit of time for that work, because a lot of it happens very naturally in person when we're with people. Like, oh, I thought of you the other day, I'm going to introduce you to this person. When we're all at home in our own little boxes, it's hard to think of those things. So if you have control over your schedule, schedule a little bit of time in to do some of that thinking of introductions, of making times to say hello to people. And it's not a burden. People are happy to say hi and they're happy to welcome you back. And by the way, oh my God, they're so thrilled to have more hands on deck and you're back.
Great advice. And in that same vein, Catherine, I know so many women will say, oh my gosh, I'm so afraid to go back to work. I've had baby brain for the past 3 months. I feel insecure about my, you know, cognitive abilities. And just this fear of like, what if I forgot how to do my job? What would you say to women that are battling with perhaps that insecurity of returning to work after being sleep deprived for the past 3 months or more?
Well, there is interesting, I wouldn't call it conclusive, evidence that during pregnancy and the postpartum that the brain does change. And I do think there's a lot of development. We're growing parts of our brain. We're using different parts of our brain that haven't potentially been activated. So it's a real growth time in so many ways. But if you recall, like you've heard, I guess, as when infants, you know, they can't walk and talk at the same time, right? That like you can't do everything at once. So there is this clumsiness about it that you think if you forget a name or you forget something so basic, you've learned something else. So it's not an either or, it's a both and, as we say all day long at the Motherhood Center, right? It's not that you forgot this and now you only know about babies, and you used to only know about work. You know about both, but it's hard to do two things at the same time. You can have two feelings at the same time, but it's hard to actually, you know, walk and chew gum. I guess that's not true. We can walk and chew gum, but you know what I mean. So it's not ultimately the science, and there's not so much of it behind the idea that we become sort of less sharp is not supported. It does not support that idea. We are actually probably sharper, okay? It doesn't feel that way because the highway has more lanes, but it's a whole new way of learning how to be within yourself and within your family dynamics and professional dynamics. There's just more to meld, and so it's harder to parse out, and it feels confusing. But you didn't lose your brain when you became a mom. You actually got more to do and sharper in many ways, and your brain is growing. So it's just a different way of thinking about it. It's a reframe on the like, oh my God, I can't remember anything. Am I having, an early Alzheimer's? No. Almost invariably, no.
I think it's also all of the research that has been done on the motherhood penalty. So the motherhood penalty is the measurable impact of motherhood of each child on a woman's earnings and her standing, her sort of rank in her workplace. So what's really important to know about that research is that, first of all, there is something you can do about it. You can really be very protective of your income and your status, knowing that. Secondly, oh my gosh, I was kind of hoping that I would do this, that I would lose my train of thought so that I could just say to you, like, it is okay, on these things, if you lose your train of thought for a second. Okay, so okay, I'm back. So that research, a lot of people's response to that, their sort of, reflex response is to say, oh yeah, but like probably she was working a little less and that's why she made a little bit less money, or she was on a maternity leave that wasn't paid, or she decided to go part-time. All of the research that's been done on the motherhood penalty accounts for all of that. And so it is really based entirely in bias. So if you are feeling, like your brain isn't all there, yes, some of that probably is exactly what Dr. Birndorf is talking about, but some of it might also be the feedback you're getting that is based entirely in bias from the people around you, who may not be ill-intended in being sort of anti-mom. Sometimes it actually comes in the form of people trying to give you a break of like, oh, I wouldn't ask her to take this on right now because she has a new baby. No, like the management training that I do is largely to undo a lot of those good intentions and to help managers understand, no, give the woman the option, let her decide how much she wants to take on right now. So I think it's important, again, to think beyond your own experience, the larger cultural forces that might be working against you. Oh, and there's a really cool study that I just love to cite. I hang on to the studies that I like the best. There was something, I don't know if you saw this, Catherine, it was about mama rats, and it was about creativity and how long it takes to get into sort of creative flow again after you have your baby. And there was like an old bunch of research that showed that really around the 12-month mark postpartum, you start to regain your creativity. And I think it looked at women who specifically worked in creative fields. And having done that myself, I was really interested. But this new study really upended all of that by showing that these mama rats who they put in this maze with the goal of getting food for their babies, that they found new creative solutions, including jumping over the walls of the maze, because they were so motivated by their babies. And I think it's important to remember that this baby is not just somebody who's keeping you from your old life, but actually is in many ways, benefiting your work by motivating you in ways that you never have been before.
Great. Send me those rat studies.
Right. So I'm going to couple this next question together because it has two sides to it. So my partner and I both work, but I'm worried that most of the child care will fall on me. How do I make things equitable? And the other side of that conversation is that in this dynamic and exercise and reality, a lot of moms end up feeling a lot of irritability, and I'll go so far as to feel rage towards their partners, especially in a pandemic, because it feels like there is not an equitable balance. And so where might that rage be coming from, and how might a mom be able to manage that? So that kind of goes out to both of you.
Do you want to start, Catherine, with the rage piece of it? Is that okay?
Sure. I was thinking of the other one, but yes, I'm going to go rage because I can talk about that all day. Yeah. They're related, right? Because I think when you feel that things are unfair, there's the potential for irritability, and more and more unfairness, and all of a sudden you're enraged. Now, I want to distinguish that. I want to distinguish irritability and rage from illness. So just because as a psychiatrist, I just want to be clear that anxiety, irritability, sleeplessness, changes in appetite, all kinds of things are normal, are normative. Let me not say normal, are typical and normative during this period of time, like let's say in the postpartum and in pregnancy. They are also the first, they are among the, first symptoms, signs and symptoms of depression. So, an isolated symptom is one thing. A cluster of symptoms makes a illness potentially. So I just want to say, because I can feel rage plenty of, all the time. And if that's not true, if I felt it all the time, I'd really have to step back and say, okay, what is this? What is this a part of? You have to really think about it. But if it's coupled or, put with a cluster of things, so I just want to make that distinction. But I do think there is this real sense of like mommy first. I don't know. There was this article recently in the Times. Was it the Times? I couldn't find it again when I went to look for it.
Yeah. So it was Jess Gross who runs the parenting vertical. It was, the title was something like they always go to mom. Yeah.
And so, it doesn't matter that my husband and I can both be home. I get the questions. I get the hugs first too, probably. So one of my friends used to say, I'm not willing to give it up. Like I'm annoyed at my husband because he does less, but I like to do more. And that like really turned me around one day. I thought, oh my God, it's both things are true. Like she's mad, she's enraged, but she doesn't want to give it up. So once she could acknowledge that she didn't want to give it up and that she got something from that and that was her choice, she felt less enraged. So, it's complicated. But rage is real. The struggle is real. And Paige was just really beautifully quoted in the Times article recently talking about rage. So Paige, you may want to hit us with a few tidbits on rage, but it's real. And it is painful because, right, it's this external expression of something, of this internal conflict and feelings, and it feels awful. And it can really eat you up inside, and it is not a state to live in. And if it's something that's happening really frequently and feels very consistent in the background or forefront of your life, you've got to ask for help. You've got to get help to understand what that is and why it's happening.
Yep. I would only just add that oftentimes we share with clients and patients at the Motherhood Center this concept of that rage can sometimes act as our best defense. It can be our bulletproof cloak that protects us from we're actually feeling behind it. And maybe rage and anger is protecting us from vulnerability, from feeling lonely and isolated, from feeling unheard or unsupported, that there might be something else if we pull that curtain back. But it's easier to feel the rage. It's more powerful. There's more energy in it than to look and see what we're trying to protect.
Love that.
It can also feel, see, dog barking in the background. I think it can also feel uncomfortable because, we have this notion as mothers that we're supposed to be nurturers, right? And I think that carries over into our work colleagues as well. And so when you feel rage, that's like, sort of the archetype is like, the man who's got a temper problem, but you don't want to be that woman. And so that can feel even more unsettling. Just to get into like practical brass tacks tips with the inequitability of a heterosexual, the research on women who have partners who are women who are raising children is actually like pretty eye-opening because they do tend to split things more equitably. But right now what we're seeing is this like extreme exacerbation of the gaps between men and women in the workplace in terms of compensation and also in terms of the work that they're doing in the home. And I really hoped at the beginning of all of this that actually some of this was going to shake out and that there's some good news, which I hang on to, that at least all of the things that were so invisible, like this term invisible labor, the things that we were doing in the home that weren't necessarily visible to our partners, if you are home with a partner and both working at the same time, it is more visible. So if you have a partner who goes and closes a door and your door is constantly open, maybe it's not as visible. Like, let's try to make it a little bit visible to everybody. I think that can be helpful. And then in terms of just, this is something that comes up pandemic aside, largely because we know that of the FMLA that 56% of American workers have access to, which is already not enough, unpaid, not enough of us get it. So the average that a man takes is 1.5 weeks, and the average that a woman takes is 8.5 weeks, neither of which obviously is adequate, but it does set up this pattern from the very beginning of, mom's going to do all the things, and mom is the one who is probably professionalized doing all the things at home, and she learns how to do them all. And so then when mom goes back to work, if dad hasn't learned all the things and mom wants them done her way, which I am a total gatekeeper myself, it just boils over. And, you get home at the end of the day and mom knows how to do everything, so she does it all. So some of that is about understanding that, like, this is not your fault. This is maybe not even in your employer's fault. Like, if they should offer equal leave to any caregiver, yes, but they should be doing it because they're required by law, and they're not. Equal paid leave, I should say. So it's not necessarily their fault either. It's not even necessarily your partner's fault if he is not stepping up to do this stuff, because he may feel pressure in his workplace that doesn't let him. However, it is something that all together, gender aside, we can work together to correct. So I would enter into any conversation that you're going to have. It's a real sit down with your partner of, like, here's what it takes to, like, create the family life together that we want. Here's everything we're putting into it. You write down your things, I'll write down my things. Let's scratch out some things together that we can both agree, like, we don't necessarily need to send the grandmothers, like, flowers on their birthday. We can call them instead. Figure those things out together as a team. And then actually circle the things on the list that you like doing, that you want to own, and that give you pleasure, and that maybe were sort of part of your fantasy of working motherhood back when you were thinking about becoming a mom. Have him do the same. Look at what's left and try to divide it as equitably as possible. And I say this knowing full well that many of you are not paid what you should be paid for your jobs, and your partners may be paid more for what they do, and they may have access to the benefits that are keeping your families healthy right now. I get that feels so important, and it is important. I don't want to negate that. So if you need to make a decision that is not entirely equitable, that's okay too, but at least talk about it, and talk about a time in the future when you're going to stop and reevaluate, when you're not necessarily just in emergency mode anymore. All the data really shows that, like, moms did 80% in the spring, did 80% of the homeschooling of kids who are doing remote school, and 14% of women, this was as of April, and I'm sure it's more since then, consider dropping out of their careers. Like, I understand why, and I understand that, like, in your little family, it might be the thing that solves this right now for you. And I don't want to tell you not to do it. I don't want to say it's not okay, but I do want to say, have a really honest discussion about what this is going to look like 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, and when you can reassess and reevaluate.
Nice. So we're coming to the end closely here of our webinar for today. I'm gonna give us a little wiggle room for those of you who can stay just a few minutes after, but right now I want to encourage everybody who has questions. If you have a question for either Lauren or Dr. Birndorf, please type it in to the chat. And so for our lightning round, I know that there's a couple of things that are coming up right now in particular, one of which is childcare, trying to figure out, what do I do? Do I get a nanny? Do I not get anyone? Do I put my child in daycare, and managing that on the backdrop of a pandemic? And if you do get a nanny or daycare, how can you ensure that there's a safety factor to that? And then, what I want to end on is just some tips that you might both have. One for around self-care, and then the other just around how to manage anxiety, as women are returning to work. So let's start with childcare. If either of you want to chime in a little bit on how to ensure safety.
I think it's important not to think of childcare maybe the way we used to, which is that I am sending my child to daycare, or I am having a nanny in my home, or my mother will full-time be caring for my child. There's so many families are making this work by having just different, like if you had a pie of childcare, dividing it up in myriad ways that are going to work for you and your partner and your kid and your safety. And that's okay. That all counts too. I think clear communication. I think if you are, employing a caregiver, or if your caregiver is your spouse, or if your caregiver is someone in your family, having, approaching it obviously with the warmth of someone in your home during a time when health is of the utmost importance, but also having regularly scheduled check-ins. So maybe it's that, once a week, you sit down and you give each other feedback about new things that have come up, and it just spares you that feeling, that nagging feeling on a Tuesday of like, oh, I have that thing I have to remember to talk to her about, but I don't want to hurt her feelings. And, it's my mom, she's providing this care for free. Like, how do I do? Just have a time set aside that will be your time to actually talk regularly, so you can both look forward to it, maybe even solve your own problems before you get there, and then have just the cushion of that time regularly. It might be daily, it might be weekly, it might be monthly now, depends sort of the cadence that feels right for you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
Communication is everything, particularly if you have a partner, because people value things differently. So this means something to you, that means something to him or her. Figure out what it is so that you're getting to do what matters to you. But communication, like Lauren, that's the key. Find a time, schedule a time, talk about it, and talk about how you feel. So some of these questions really have to, feeling guilty, whether it's related to work or otherwise. It's like all feelings are legitimate. They are yours. There is not a feeling that is wrong. That's not an answer on the test. Wrong is not an option. All feelings are there. That doesn't mean you get to act on them and be a jerk about how you feel, but the feeling and the action and what you do with it, those are separate things. So all these feelings, that things we're talking about today, particularly as they relate to work and how your boss may be treating you, or that you're getting paid less or more, those are legitimate. And do not make yourself feel bad for having the feelings about it, for being angry, for feeling guilty, for feeling conflicted. Those are yours. You own them. Again, that doesn't mean you get to act on them, but you have to then think about how you want to deal with how you feel. So those are very different things. So I'm not answering the question about I'm seeing some of these on the side page, but how you manage that, but feel the feel. The kids are saying these days, all the feels. It's like, it's right. I mean, feel it. Allow yourself to feel it. Huff and puff, punch a pillow, take a walk, get pissed, whatever it is. But those are feelings. They're yours. No one has to legitimize them, but you.
Nice. And any last minute tips on why self-care is so important right now, even though it feels a little bit tricky? Time and space to yourself, and any other tips that have to do with managing anxiety during this period of returning to work.
This is not super PC, but I just want everybody to understand that self-care is not when you're a new mom. Pandemic, no pandemic. Self-care is not like you go get a massage. I think that we have this notion that if we can't do that kind of care of ourselves, that we've failed, because self-care has become such a popular term. There are all kinds of ways to take care of yourself. You can I don't know, you can scrub the calluses off your feet. That can count as taking care of yourself. The day that I gave myself a pedicure in April felt like, oh my God, I have my shit together enough to be able to scrape the dead nastiness off my feet. That, I carry that feeling all day long. And that actually is sort of a beauty thing. But it's important, I think, to recognize when you do go through that list of the things it takes to take care of my family and have the kind of family working life that I hoped for, to recognize that some of those things that are in service of other people may also be in service of yourself. If you imagined that you would love picking out your baby's outfit every day, which is, maybe sounds silly, but actually it mattered a lot to me to be able to do that. And I didn't want to cede that to somebody else, that you have to account for the fact that that's not entirely a chore. That's actually something you take pleasure in. So yes, you're getting the baby dressed and changing the diaper and doing all of that. But if some piece of that feels good, please, by all means, let it count. And I think that that's okay for new moms, especially, to know that some of those tasks that are in service of other people actually feel good for you too. And that's okay. You haven't neglected yourself necessarily.
And sleep. Don't forget to sleep. Sleep is medicine. Sleep is, for me, everything. Make sure you're prioritizing sleep. That's self-care, but that's also just That's care of self. I know that's self. But I also just want to say, if you're feeling overwhelmed, someone's asking about mental health, also take care of yourself and your mental health. And if you are feeling, and Lauren could probably answer this better in the workplace, but we often give women permission to say, I can't do this all right now. And it's not that that I don't have some obvious infection, or I don't have COVID, God forbid, and it may be you need a mental health break, and that may go towards taking time, which may look like leave or disability. If that's what you need, because this is such a fraught time of doing everything at once, it is so overwhelming, please take it. And employers have to respect that. And what the penalty is for that, Lauren, I mean, you may be able to speak more to that in another seminar. We need more time. But please take it for yourself. You are doing no one's helped by if you're not well.
I'll make 2 plugs for legal organizations. So the Pregnancy Project at Burke Weiss law firm. So it's a mother-daughter team. They're awesome. And also A Better Balance. Particularly, I think that they help, women in all kinds of jobs, but particularly for women who may not feel they have a voice, women who are hourly wage workers, class action suits, those kinds of things. They're a good resource to help you understand, is this actually a legal case that I have or not? Yeah. And then the other thing that you should know about, needing to take disability to take care of your mental health is that can be above and beyond your FMLA if you've already taken that time. You need a doctor to sort of, write you a note, but your employer is legally obligated to engage in a discussion with you. They're not necessarily legally obligated to say, okay, you can stay home for 6 weeks, but if what you need is to start working 2 hours later every day, and that's a reasonable accommodation, and it would allow you to eventually be able to resume your job in full, they need to engage with you in that discussion and give it to you.
So I'm going to take one quick question from the audience. I'm going to answer one, and then I'm just going to let everybody know for the questions that we were not able to get to, we do have your email because you registered for this event. And we will make every effort to send you a brief response to your question. I also want to say that we had a couple of slides that we don't probably have time to share today, but an email will go out after this that will give you a link for both Lauren's book and Dr. Birndorf's book. Lauren's book focuses on the 5th trimester, and Dr. Birndorf's is all about what no one tells you and what to expect during pregnancy and the postpartum period emotionally. And then also a number of articles that have come out recently that really speak to the challenge that women, mothers and new mothers in particular, are facing during COVID. But just to get one question in from an audience member, how can I ensure I will not be penalized in the workplace if I have to leave my career and stay home full time until this all ends? And I think we're seeing this happen. This is a choice that a lot of women are having to make right now.
I don't think there is any insurance. I think that you may well be penalized. And so I think if you have the resource of having a partner and you're not a single mom, I think really work with that partner to make a plan that that spells out sort of the identity and financial commitment that you both have to each other's careers. And really assess, like, how long are we going to let this be the new normal? Like, is it when school starts back again? To what degree? Do I want to assess again after a year? And there are all kinds of things you can do when you're not technically working for pay that you might be able to shoehorn into your day that still count. This is the time to sign up for the masterclass. This is the time to watch all the YouTube videos on that thing that you're interested in that probably would be beneficial to your career. I mean, this is going to sound so silly, but I was a magazine editor for years at Glamour magazine, and I edited the entertainment section. And can I tell you how much television I watched? Like 0. So it would have been beneficial to me to actually know more about celebrities and watch more of those shows. And so that may feel like junk time. If you can make a case, if you can rationalize how some of those hobbies and things that keep you emotionally healthy and engaged in the world and connected to your friends, my God, the friends that you make, and it's really hard to make friends right now, but any connections you can have, with women, from the Motherhood Center, any kind of community you have, these are not just friends who have babies. These are friends who have probably also some form of a career or education that may also be on pause, that may also be navigating these things. This is your networking right now. Do it. It absolutely counts, and it will be really beneficial to you, whether that's in a month or 2 years. So stay engaged, you know, in that part of your brain, and see everyone as an opportunity, not just to be a friend, but to be a work friend.
Well said. And then lastly, I just want to add, there's a question here about a mom in a startup with no HR and is looking for public state guidelines around a pump room. And I just want to let you know that it is a state law that all workspaces create a pump room for women to use in the workplace. And I will also include that in the email that we send around to everybody that registered, so you can actually share that with your employer and say, hey there, guess what? This is actually a law now. I just want to thank you both tremendously. It was such a privilege and joy to have you both here sharing your tips and insight to really help women navigate this really super challenging time of balancing motherhood and their professional careers, either under the same roof or outside. Thank you so very much. I feel like there was so much we got to, a lot of stuff we didn't, and so maybe we'll have to have a take 2 on this in a month or so. But thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining. And again, this will be available on our website if you missed any of it, or if you want to share it with a friend by the middle of this week.
Thanks, Paige.
Thank you,
Thank
Lauren.
You so much. Thanks everybody for being here.
All right, bye-bye.